A frontier town in October, 1884. Snow has not yet fallen on the Bitterroot foothills, but the air has teeth, and the wind has been moving through the lodgepole pines for 3 days like something waiting. A small house at the end of a 4-mile road. No curtains in the windows, no flowers in the yard, no second chair on the porch. Inside, a woman folds a gray wool dress with hands that have learned not to shake. She is 26 years old. She has $37 in her purse, an ivory comb at the bottom of her bag, and a bruise under her collar she has covered 3 times this morning. She does not know yet that there were 5 before her. She does not know yet what is carved into the handle of her mother's comb. She only knows the wagon is leaving for town in 20 minutes, and she will be 20 minutes late. Silver Creek sat in a fold of the Bitterroot foothills, like a thing the mountains had forgotten to swallow. October, 1884, the kind of cold that does not announce itself, the kind that gets inside a wool coat and stays. Tabitha Halloran stepped down from the stagecoach, with one hand braced against the doorframe, and the other clutching a carpet bag she had stitched herself in Boston 3 weeks earlier, $37 in her purse, a folded letter from a man she had never met, and a small ivory comb wrapped in flannel at the bottom of the bag. Her mother had given her that comb the week before she died, 12 years ago. Tabitha had not let it leave her person since. The driver tossed her trunk into the dust. She did not flinch. 26 years of practice. The man waiting on the boardwalk was tall, not broad, tall in the way some men make themselves narrow on purpose. Black coat, black hat, a face that had been handsome once and had decided handsome was not worth the trouble. Miss Halloran. Mr. Pickett. He did not offer his hand. She did not expect him to, because what she had learned about men over 26 years was this: the ones who offered their hands too quickly were selling something. The ones who did not offer at all had already bought what they wanted. Roy Pickett had bought her for $60 and a one-way stage ticket from Boston. The price of a horse. "Wagon is this way," he said. She followed him. She did not look back at the stage. She did not look at the women on the boardwalk who had stopped talking when she passed. She did not look at the old woman sitting on a low bench outside the Mercantile, with a tin cup of coffee in her hand and eyes like winter glass. She looked at the back of Roy Pickett's coat, because that was where she lived now, behind a man's coat. The wagon rattled north out of town for 2 hours. Roy did not speak. Tabitha counted the miles by the way her stomach turned, by the way the road climbed and the trees grew thicker, by the way the sky went from blue to bruise. When they pulled into the yard of the Pickett place, she understood her mistake. The house was small, not poor small, careful small, the kind of small a man builds when he does not intend to share. The barn was new, the fences were new, the well was new, but the house had no curtains, no flowers, no second chair on the porch, she thought. Oh, she thought, he has done this before. She did not know yet how many times. That night, Roy Pickett drank from a brown bottle at the kitchen table and watched her unpack her trunk. She kept her back straight. She did not let him see her hands. He said, "You walk strange," she said. "Long ride from Boston, sir." He said, "You will not call me sir in this house. You will call me Roy. We are married Sunday next." She said, "Yes, Roy." The word felt like swallowing a stone. He drank. She folded, until the bottle was empty, until he stood up. until he stumbled past her on the way to the bedroom, and his hand came down hard on the small of her back, and she lost her footing, and her knee hit the edge of the porch step on the way down. The crack of bone on wood, the sharp white flash behind her eyes. She did not cry out. 26 years of practice. Roy looked down at her on the boards. He blinked, like a man trying to remember why he was angry. Then he laughed, soft, almost gentle, as if her falling had been a joke they shared. "Watch your step, Tabby. Watch your step." He went to bed. She stayed on the porch until her knee stopped screaming, which was a long time. She watched her breath turn to silver in the moonlight, and she thought about the comb at the bottom of her bag, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about how she had crossed 2,000 miles to find the same man with a different face. Then she got up, because what else was there? 3 weeks passed. She learned the rhythm of the house. Which floorboard creaked, which way the wind cut through the bedroom window, which mornings Roy left for town, and which mornings he sat at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle and watching her cook. She learned the language of his moods. The flat voice meant tired. The quiet voice meant dangerous. The cheerful voice meant something had already been decided about her, and she would find out at supper. She learned to limp without limping. She learned to apply rice powder to the bruise under her collar before the mirror fogged over. She learned to braid her hair tight enough that no loose strand would tempt his hand to it. She learned to say sorry before he opened his mouth. She also learned that there were 5 letters in the locked drawer of his roll-top desk. She found them by accident, looking for matches. 5 letters, 5 different hands, 5 different women: Mary Catherine, Cordelia, Susanna, Pearl, Lottie, all of them addressed Dearest Roy. All of them written with the trembling hope of women who believed they were about to begin something. All of them dated, the earliest from 1872, the latest from 1883. None of them in the house, none of them anywhere Tabitha could see. She put the letters back exactly as she had found them. She closed the drawer. She washed her hands. Then she stood at this kitchen window for a long time, watching the wind move through the lodgepole pines on the ridge above the house, and she understood that she was not the first wife. She was not even the 5th. She was the 6th. The 6th what? That was the question. Saturday morning, Roy told her she would attend church with him on Sunday. He told her she would wear her gray wool dress. He told her she would stand at his elbow and smile when the women of Silver Creek welcomed her. He told her these things while sharpening a knife on a whetstone at the kitchen table. She said, "Yes, Roy," he said, "and on Monday you will go to the mercantile and buy flour and sugar and a tin of lard. Mrs. Crowley keeps account. Do not embarrass me." She said, "No, Roy." Sunday morning she walked into the church on Roy's arm. The pews were full, the women in their good bonnets, the men in their winter coats, the minister at his pulpit, the smell of cedar and wood smoke and lamp oil and the particular cold sweat of people who have come inside out of the wind. A woman near the front turned to look at her. A handsome woman, late 40s, hair the color of pewter, a face that had once been beautiful and had decided beauty was a kind of currency to be spent carefully. Mrs. Agnes Crowley. She smiled at Tabitha. The smile did not reach her eyes. Later, Tabitha would understand that Mrs. Crowley owned the mercantile and the boarding house and a quarter share in the freight company and a slice of every business that mattered in Silver Creek. Later, she would understand that Mrs. Crowley had made her money in ways that did not bear close inspection. Later, she would understand that the smile on Mrs. Crowley's face that morning was the smile of a woman calculating how long Tabitha would last. But that was later. That morning, Tabitha only knew the smile felt wrong. After the service, Mrs. Crowley swept down the aisle in a rustle of black taffeta and stopped in front of Tabitha and Roy and said in a voice loud enough for half the congregation to hear, "Roy Pickett, another bride. The Lord does provide, doesn't he?" Roy's jaw tightened. A few of the women near them turned away. Mrs. Crowley touched Tabitha's sleeve with two cold fingers. "Welcome to Silver Creek, dear. We do hope you are stronger than the last one." Then she swept past. Tabitha did not move, did not breathe, did not look at Roy. But she felt the shift in the air behind her, the way the women on the pew across the aisle dropped their eyes, the way a man near the door cleared his throat and walked out, the way the minister at the pulpit suddenly found something fascinating in his prayer book. Stronger than the last one, the last one, the last one. Outside in the wagon, Roy did not speak the whole ride home. When they reached the yard, he climbed down and walked into the barn and did not come out for an hour. When he came out, his knuckles were skinned, and there was a fresh dent in the side of the grain bin. He did not touch her that night, which was worse than if he had, because the not touching was a kind of waiting. Monday morning he handed her $2 and a list and said, "Mercantile, be back by noon." She said, "Yes, Roy." She walked the 4 miles into Silver Creek slowly, because of her knee, because of the cold, because every step away from that house felt like a small act of theft, and she did not want to spend the theft too fast. She reached the Mercantile at 20 minutes past 11, 20 minutes late. She would remember that detail for the rest of her life. The bell above the door rang as she stepped inside. The store smelled of coffee beans and saddle leather and wood smoke from the iron stove in the back. Mrs. Crowley was at the counter, writing in a ledger. She looked up, the pewter hair, the careful smile. "Mrs. Pickett, you are late," Tabitha said. "I am sorry." The bell rang again behind her. 3 men walked in. She did not turn at first, because her training said, "Do not look at strange men in strange places." Her training said, "Make yourself small." Her training said, "The door behind you is a door you cannot use." But the first man stopped just inside the threshold, and he did not move past her, and she could feel him there, not threatening, just present. She turned. He was tall, taller than Roy, taller than the doorframe had any business allowing, 6'5" at least, a shoulder span that made the door look insufficient, a long oilcloth duster the color of wet bark, a felt hat in his hand, dark hair touched silver at the temples, a jaw shadowed with 3 days of beard, and eyes the color of strong tea held up to a window. He looked at her face, then his eyes dropped, just for a second, to the line of her collar, where the rice powder had worn off in the wind on the walk into town. He saw the bruise. She watched him see it. The second man stepped up beside him, slightly shorter, wider through the shoulders, a jagged scar across the bridge of his nose, a long sheathed knife on his belt, younger, maybe 29. The third man came around behind them, smiling, the youngest of the 3. Sandy hair, a face that had not yet learned to be guarded. 26 or 7. He carried a paper sack of what looked like dried apple rings, and he was already chewing one. The youngest one said, "Pardon us, ma'am." The middle one said nothing. The tallest one said, "After you, miss." She did not move, because she did not know what to do with "after you, miss." Because Nobody had said after you, miss, to her since her father died. Mrs. Crowley behind the counter cleared her throat. The sound was meant to move things along. The sound was meant to remind the tall man that there were rules in Silver Creek, and one of them was that Pickett's woman did not need to be addressed by anyone other than her husband. The tall man did not look at Mrs. Crowley. He looked at Tabitha. He said, "Miss, you do not need to apologize for the way you walk." She did not breathe. She did not breathe for what felt like a year. The youngest man behind him went still. The dried apple ring stopped halfway to his mouth. The middle one took a small step forward, and his eyes went to the line of her collar, and his expression did not change, but something in his shoulders dropped 1 degree lower into readiness. Mrs. Crowley said, "Mr. Ashcroft, I am sure Mrs. Pickett does not require your concern. She is a married woman." The tall man did not turn his head. He said, "I was not aware concern required permission from you, Mrs. Crowley." Silence. Tabitha could hear her own heart. She could hear the iron stove ticking in the back of the store. She could hear a horse snort somewhere outside on the street. She could hear her own training. The voice in her head that said, "Look down." The voice that said, "Say nothing." The voice that said, "Get the flour, get the sugar, get the lard, get out, get home before Roy hears." She looked up. Just for a second, the tall man's eyes met hers, and he gave her one short nod, like a man closing a door gently behind him so as not to wake a child. Then he stepped aside, to make room for her at the counter. She moved past him. Her shoulder brushed his sleeve, just barely. The oilcloth was cold from the morning ride. Beneath it, she felt the heat of him like a lamp. She set Roy's list on the counter. She said in a voice that was somehow still her own, "Flour, sugar, a tin of lard. On Mr. Pickett's account, please." Mrs. Crowley wrote without looking at her. Behind her, the 3 brothers moved through the store with the efficient quiet of men who had come down off the mountain for a winter's worth of supplies and intended to spend exactly as much time in Silver Creek as the job required, and not 1 minute more. She did not look at them again, but she felt them, particularly the tall one. She felt him the whole time Mrs. Crowley was weighing the flour. She felt him while the bell on the iron coffee grinder clanked. She felt him when she pulled the $2 from her purse, and her fingers did not shake, even though they had no business being steady. When she turned to leave, he was at the door. He opened it for her. The youngest one tipped his hat. "Ma'am." The middle one met her eyes for a half-second, and then looked at the floor, as if he had seen too much already and did not want to add to it. The tall one held the door. She passed through. The cold hit her face like water. She made it 3 steps onto the boardwalk before her flour sack shifted and slipped, and hit the planks and burst at the seam, and a soft white cloud bloomed across her boots. She did not move. She just stared at it. 8 pounds of flour, 80 cents at Crowley's prices. Roy's mood when she came home with half a sack. She did not move because she could not move. A voice beside her. Low. "Easy, miss. Step back. Watch your hem." The tall one. Crouching. Already gathering the corners of the sack. Already pulling a clean bandana from his pocket. Already lifting what was left and tying it off as if he had been waiting all his life for the particular task of saving a stranger's flour on a boardwalk in Silver Creek. She said, "Please, you do not need to." He looked up at her from one knee. The eyes the color of strong tea. He said, "I know I do not need to." That was all. 3 words. She felt something inside her chest crack along a fault line she had not known was there. She stepped back, carefully, because of her knee. The motion did not go unobserved. The middle brother was on the boardwalk now, 2 scarred nose tilted just slightly, and the youngest had set down his paper sack of dried apples and was watching with the unguarded face of a man who did not yet know how to hide what he was thinking. The tall one stood, holding the tied-off sack. He said, "Where is your wagon, miss?" She said, "I walked." The youngest brother made a small sound, half a laugh, half something else. The tall one's jaw moved once. He said, "From the picket place." She said nothing. He said, 4 miles. She said nothing. He said, "On that knee." She said nothing. He looked at his brothers, just a glance. The middle one nodded once. The youngest one bent and picked up the rest of her parcels. The tall one said, "We are going your direction. We have a wagon. We will see you to your gate." She said, "Mr. Pickett would not." She stopped. She did not know how to finish that sentence. The tall one did. He said, "Mr. Pickett does not need to know." And then, as if to himself, as if the words had been sitting behind his teeth for 10 miles. "And if he does, he can come ask me." She looked at him. She really looked. And what she saw was not a rescuer. Not in the storybook sense. Not a man with a white horse and a clean coat. What she saw was a man who had clearly killed before. Who had clearly carried bodies. Whose hands had clearly broken things that needed breaking. A man who lived above the snow line for a reason, but also a man who was holding her flour sack as carefully as if it contained a sleeping child. She said, "I do not know you." He said, "Beckett Ashcroft." The middle one said, "Amen." The youngest said, "Rhett. And we do not bite Mrs. Pickett. Not on Mondays." The tall one, Beckett, closed his eyes for 1 second as if asking heaven for patience with his brother. She almost smiled. Almost. Then a voice from behind her cut the moment open. Mrs. Pickett, Mrs. Crowley, standing in the open door of the mercantile, wrapped in a black shawl now, the careful smile gone, replaced by something flatter. "Mrs. Pickett, I am sure Mr. Pickett is expecting you home." Beckett Ashcroft did not turn. He kept his eyes on Tabitha. He said low enough that only she could hear it. "Your choice, miss. Always your choice." Her choice. 2 words she did not recognize the shape of. She had not made a choice in 12 years. She had made arrangements. She had made compromises. She had made apologies. She had made herself small enough to fit through doorways without bumping against them. But she had not made a choice. She looked at the 4-mile road, at her knee that would not carry her, at the sack of flour bound in a stranger's bandana, at Mrs. Crowley's flat eyes, at the 3 men who had walked out of the mountains this morning for reasons that had nothing to do with her and who had now made her business their business in the time it took to cross a mercantile floor. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Ashcroft. I will walk." Because she was not yet brave. She was only thinking about being brave. Beckett nodded once, as if her answer had been the one he expected, as if her not yet brave was something he could wait on. He said, "Then take this." He held out the bandana-wrapped flour. She took it. His fingers did not touch hers. He stepped back. The youngest brother, Rhett, pressed a small paper twist into her free hand as he passed her on the boardwalk. She looked down, dried apple rings. She did not understand why she wanted to cry. She walked the 4 miles home. She walked them slowly. The dried apple rings sat in her apron pocket the entire way. When she reached the yard, the sun was already low. Roy was on the porch. He had been drinking. Not enough to be dangerous yet. Enough to be sharp, he said. "You are late," she said. "I am sorry." The sack broke. He looked at the bandana tied around her flower. He looked at it for a long time. The color of it, the careful knot, the size of the hand that had made the knot. He said, "Whose is this?" She said, "A man at the store helped me." The sack split. Roy said, "Which man?" She said, "I do not know his name." She lied. She had never lied to Roy before. She felt the lie land in her stomach, like a small stone falling to the bottom of a deep well. She felt it settle. She felt it begin to glow. Roy stared at her for a long beat. Then he took the bandana off the flower. He held it up to the dying light. He turned it once. He looked at the small embroidered letter, A in one corner, that Tabitha had not even noticed. He smiled. The smile was the worst one she had seen yet. He said, "Ashcroft." She said nothing. He folded the bandana once, twice. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, against his heart. He said, "Get inside." She got inside. He did not strike her that night. He did not need to. He sat at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle for 2 hours and did not speak, and his silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She slept on the floor of the spare room, with her carpet bag against the door, and one hand wrapped around the small ivory comb beneath her pillow. The bone of the comb was warm against her palm. She traced the carving on the handle with her thumb in the dark. The little eagle her father had pressed into the ivory when she was 6 years old. She had always thought it was just an eagle. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about a great many things, but she did not know yet how wrong. Tuesday. Roy went to town early. He did not say where. He did not say when he would return. Tabitha waited an hour. Then she went to the locked drawer of the roll-top desk. She had watched him hide the key in the 3rd book on the 2nd shelf, a copy of Pilgrim's Progress that he had never read. She opened the drawer. The 5 letters were there. But behind the letters, pushed against the back of the drawer, was something she had not seen the first time. A small leather pouch. Inside it, a ring, a thin gold wedding band, worn smooth on the inside, engraved with 2 letters, SP. She stared at the ring, Susanna Pickett, the 3rd letter, the one dated 1879. She put the ring back. She closed the drawer. She locked it. She put the key back in Pilgrim's Progress. She washed her hands 3 times. Then she sat at the kitchen table and ate 1 dried apple ring from the paper twist in her apron pocket. Just 1. Slowly, as if it were a sacrament. Outside, the wind moved through the lodgepole pines on the ridge. She thought about the 4 miles into town. She thought about the tall man with the eyes the color of strong tea. She thought about her mother's comb. She thought about Susanna Pickett's ring. And, for the first time in 12 years, she had a question she could not pray her way out of. What if she was not allowed to leave, because the leaving would tell the truth? Wednesday morning, the wind shifted. The temperature dropped 20 degrees by noon. The first hard frost of October laid itself across the yard like a white sheet pulled tight. Roy came in from the barn at midday. His mood was strange, loose at the edges. he said. "Wagon broke an axle. I will be in town overnight. Mrs. Crowley is putting me up at the boarding house. Bar the door at sundown. Do not answer for anyone. I will be back tomorrow before noon." She said, "Yes, Roy." He kissed the top of her head. He had never kissed her before. It was the worst thing he had ever done. When his wagon was a black dot at the end of the road, she stood at the window, and watched it disappear, and her hands began to shake. Not from fear. From something else. She did not have a name for it yet. She would learn the name later. At 3 in the afternoon, she heard horses, 3 of them, coming up the road slow, not pushing, not trying to be quiet either. She went to the front window. 3 riders, a tall one in front, a scarred one to his right, a sandy-haired one behind. All 3 in long oilcloth dusters, all 3 armed. She did not breathe. Roy had said, "Do not answer for anyone." Roy had said, "Do not answer." The riders stopped at the edge of the yard. The tall one did not dismount. He raised his voice just enough. "Mrs. Pickett, Beckett Ashcroft, my brothers and I came down off the mountain to deliver a sack of flour that we did not pay for. We will leave it on the porch. We will not cross your fence without your word. Are you all right, miss?" She stood inside the front window, with her hand over her mouth. She did not move. She did not answer. Until she did. She opened the door. She stepped out onto the porch in her gray wool dress with no coat, and the wind cutting straight through her sleeves. She said, "He is not here." Beckett Ashcroft was already off his horse before she finished the sentence. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. He did not climb them. He stood in the frozen dirt of the yard with the wind moving his coat, and he looked up at her on the porch and he said, "Miss, the man you are calling your husband is not what he told you he was. We have been making inquiries for 3 days. There are things you need to hear. We can say them here in the wind, or we can say them somewhere warm. The choice is yours. But once you hear them, you will not be able to unhear them. So I am asking before I begin." She looked at him. She looked past him at the brother with the scarred nose, who was already scanning the road behind them for dust. She looked at the youngest one, who had taken his hat off and was holding it against his chest, like a man at a funeral. She thought about Susanna Pickett's ring. She thought about 5 letters in a locked drawer. She thought about the bandana against Roy's heart. She thought about how Roy had kissed the top of her head this morning, for the first and only time in 3 weeks. She thought about the way Mrs. Crowley had said, "We do hope you are stronger than the last one." She thought about her mother's comb, and the eagle, and the dawning suspicion that her father had given her something he had never explained. She thought about choice. She said, "Tell me." And Beckett Ashcroft set one boot on the bottom step of the porch and took off his hat and began to tell her. The wind moved through the lodgepole pines. Somewhere far down the valley, a single bell rang once at the Silver Creek Church, and on a low bench outside the mercantile in town, an old woman in a black shawl with eyes like winter glass set down her empty tin cup, looked up the road toward the picket place and said softly to no one at all, "There she goes, the 6th one. God keep her." Mrs. Ada Whitfield had been the midwife of Silver Creek for 40 years. She had watched 5 young wives vanish in that time. She had attended none of their funerals. Because there had been no funerals. She picked up her cup. She went back inside the mercantile. She did not speak to Mrs. Crowley, because Mrs. Ada Whitfield had decided 3 nights ago that the 6th one would live. and she was about to tell the Ashcroft brothers exactly where to dig. Beckett Ashcroft didn't climb the porch steps. He stood in the frozen dirt with his hat in his hand, and he told her 3 things. He told her his sister Mara had come to Silver Creek 8 years ago as a mail-order bride. He told her Mara had written home for 2 months, and then her letters had stopped. He told her the sheriff in 1876 had ruled it a runaway case and closed the file, and the Ashcroft brothers had been looking ever since. He told her the second thing. He told her Mara had been engaged to a man named Roy Pickett. The porch tilted under Tabitha's feet. Not really. Inside her head. The third thing he told her was the one she had already begun to suspect on her own. The one Mrs. Ada Whitfield had finally whispered to Eamon at the back of the Mercantile the night before. The one the brothers had been carrying down the mountain all morning, like a coffin between them. He said, "Miss Halloran, you are not the first. You are the 6th. The 6th. The number landed inside her chest, like a horseshoe dropped on a tin roof. The 6th. What? She wanted to ask. She did not ask, because she already knew. She had been the 6th all week. The 6th in Mrs. Crowley's careful smile. The 6th in the silence of the women in the pews. The 6th in the small leather pouch behind 5 letters in a locked drawer. Beckett kept talking. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man laying planks across a river so a woman could cross. He named them: Mary Catherine, 1872, Cordelia, 1874, his sister Mara, 1876, Susanna, 1879, Pearl, 1881, Lottie, 1883, and then, after a beat that felt like a held breath at a funeral, you, 1884. She did not cry. She had used her crying up a long time ago. She said, "Where are they?" Beckett looked at his brothers. Eamon at the edge of the yard, Rhett by the gate, both of them watching the road for dust. He said, "We do not know yet. We have one woman in town who knows part of it. She is on her way up the mountain tomorrow, if the weather holds. She would not say more in the open," Tabitha said. "Mrs. Whitfield." Beckett's eyes moved on her face. "Quick," he said. "How did you know that?" She said. "She was sitting outside the Mercantile the day I arrived." She did not speak, but she looked at me like I was already dead. Rhett at the gate let out a breath that was almost a laugh and was mostly something else. Beckett didn't laugh. He said, "She has been waiting for you, miss. Since the day Pickett mailed for a bride out of Boston. She just did not know which one of you would be brave enough to come down the road one more time after she warned you." Tabitha said, "She has not warned me." Beckett said, "She is about to." Wind moved through the lodgepole pines on the ridge. Tabitha looked at her front door. She looked at the bandana corner of flour Roy had taken into the house last night. She looked at the small dent in the porch step where her knee had cracked against the wood 3 weeks ago. She thought about the kiss Roy had pressed to the top of her head that morning, before he left for town. She thought about how a man does not kiss a wife he intends to keep alive. He kisses a wife he intends to bury. She said, "Mr. Ashcroft," he said. "Beckett." She said, "Beckett, I have $37. A trunk I cannot lift on this knee. A husband returning before noon tomorrow. And a sheriff in town who eats supper at this man's table. Tell me what you are offering." He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen him almost smile. It changed his whole face. He said, I am offering a horse, a wagon, a road, a house on a mountain that has not had a woman in it for 8 years. A locked door if you want one. A key on the inside of that door. And 3 men who will sleep in the barn until you say otherwise. She said, and if I say no? He said, then we ride off this property and you go back to your kitchen. And I am not going to lie to you, miss. I do not think you live until Easter. The frost glittered on the rail of the porch. She said, how long do I have? Beckett looked at the sun. He said he would be back by noon tomorrow. We assume he lied. We have until first dark tonight. After that the snow comes and the pass closes, and we leave by a road I would rather not use, she said. Tomorrow is too late, he said. Yes, miss, she said. Then it is now. She did not remember walking back into the house. She remembered the inside of her own head. The voice in her head said, get the carpet bag. The voice in her head said, get the comb. The voice in her head said, get the deed papers from your father's tin box at the bottom of the trunk you did not let Roy open. The voice in her head said, get out, get out, get out. She did all of those things in 9 minutes. She did not take her gray wool dress. She did not take the bonnet Roy had bought her in town. She did not take the little silver thimble he had given her on their second day as if it were a wedding ring. She left those things on the bed, a statement. She did not know yet how loudly it would be read. Rhett carried her trunk down the porch steps as if it weighed nothing. Eamon held the horses. Beckett stood at the foot of the steps. He did not offer her his hand. He did not crowd the doorway. He waited. She came out wearing her one good coat, her mother's comb in her pocket, her father's tin box of papers under her arm. She looked at the house one last time. She said, I lived in there for 21 days. Beckett said, Miss, you did not live there. She looked at him. She said, what did I do then? He said, you waited. She did not have a word for what happened in her chest at that. She got on the wagon. They drove off the picket place at 5 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. The first snowflake hit the back of her hand at 5:15. It melted there. Larkspur Ridge sat 11 miles up a road that was not really a road. It was a deer track that some other Ashcroft 100 years older than these 3 had decided to widen with an axe. The wagon climbed slow. The horses blew steam. Eamon rode ahead. Rhett rode behind. Beckett drove. He did not look at her. He kept both hands on the lines. He spoke once. He said, tell me when it hurts, I will stop. She did not tell him. It hurt the whole way. She did not stop him. The house at Larkspur Ridge came out of the trees at last light. It was not a cabin. She had been expecting a cabin. It was a house, 2 stories, a long porch, a stone chimney already smoking, lodgepole pine walls weathered to silver, a barn out back, a bunkhouse off to the side, a root cellar dug into the slope. A woman lived here once. You could tell, the way the windows had been set, the way the rail of the porch had been finished smooth on the upper edge so a hand resting on it would not catch a splinter. She did not ask whose hand. She already knew. Rhett helped her down off the wagon, and his hand under her elbow was as careful as if she were made of pressed flowers in an old book. Eamon took the horses. Beckett carried her trunk through the front door and set it inside the parlor, and stood back from it as if it were a thing she might need to approach alone. She crossed the threshold. The house smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and a faint trace of beeswax from a candle burning on the kitchen table. Beckett said, there is a room at the top of the stairs. Eamon laid a fire in it this morning. The door has a lock. The key is on the inside. We will sleep in the bunkhouse. There is bread and stew and coffee on the stove. Eat when you can, she said. And if I cannot, he said. Then sleep first. Eat in the morning, she said. And if I cannot sleep, he said. Then come down. There will be a man at the kitchen table all night, not for you, for the door. She looked at him. She said, I do not understand any of this, he said. You do not have to understand it tonight, miss. You only have to be here tonight. She climbed the stairs. The room at the top was small, whitewashed. A narrow bed under a quilt the color of dried lavender. A washstand. A small mirror she did not look into. A single window facing the ridge. A fire in the grate. A pitcher of warm water on the washstand. A folded nightdress on the foot of the bed. Not new, soft from many washings. The kind of garment that had once belonged to a sister. She did not put it on. She lay down on top of the quilt in her traveling clothes. She turned the key in the lock from the inside. She set the comb on the pillow beside her head. She did not weep. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind in the lodge poles and the small, clean crack of the fire and a single set of boot steps that crossed the floor of the kitchen below her room every 30 minutes or so until dawn. She counted the boot steps. She got to 147. Then the windows began to gray, and she finally believed she had survived one night. 3 weeks happened. She would not have been able to tell you how. She woke. She ate. She mended a tear in her one good coat. She sat at the kitchen table with her father's tin box open in front of her and did not understand what she was looking at. She slept with the comb under her pillow. She locked her door from the inside every night, even though she had stopped believing she needed to. She learned the Ashcroft brothers slowly. She learned Rhett first because Rhett was the easiest. 27 years old, a face that had not yet decided to close. He had been 19 when Mara disappeared. The twin she had outgrown by 1/2 inch and 3 pounds. The twin who had never quite caught up after. He still slept with one of her hair ribbons tied around the post of his bed. He did not know Tabitha had seen this. He left his door open one morning, when he was splitting kindling, and she had walked past on her way to the kitchen. She learned he could sing, not well, but often. He whistled while he cleaned tack. He hummed while he split wood. He sang 2 verses of an old Scottish ballad in the barn one afternoon while he was currying a black mare, and she stood on the path outside and listened until her chest hurt. She learned he was the one who had decorated her room. The lavender quilt, the pitcher, the folded nightdress that had been his mother's. He had set those things in the room the morning the brothers rode down off the mountain to find her. He had set them out before they even knew her name. Because Mrs. Whitfield had told them only that there was a 6th one, and Rhett had believed in the 6th one already. She learned Eamon's 2nd, because Eamon was harder, 29 years old. The scar across the bridge of his nose came from a wolf he had killed at 16, with a knife he still wore on his belt. He did not speak unless he had something to say. He read the Bible at night by the kitchen lamp. He could track a man across bare granite. He had been the one Beckett sent down into Silver Creek for 3 nights running to listen at the back doors of the saloons and to slip a folded dollar to old Mrs. Whitfield in the alley behind the mercantile. She learned Eamon did not look at her with pity. He looked at her like a man looking at his sister. He looked at her like he had been waiting 8 years to look at someone that way again. The first night she came down the stairs in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, he was at the kitchen table with the Bible open in front of him. He did not stand up. He did not greet her. He moved the coffee pot, 2 inches toward her side of the table, and went on reading. That was all. It was the kindest thing anyone had done to her in 12 years. She learned Beckett last, because Beckett was a door. He was a door she did not yet have the key for. He spoke to her at meals. He asked her 3 things every morning. He asked, "How is the knee? Did you sleep? Did you eat?" She always answered, "Better, a little." Yes, she always lied about one of those 3. He always knew which one. He never said. He never crowded her in a doorway. He never put a hand on her shoulder. He never sat too close. He took his coffee on the porch instead of in the kitchen if she was in the kitchen alone. He waited until she had passed before he climbed the stairs. And once, just once, in the 2nd week, she came in from the woodpile with her arms full of split kindling, and he was at the bottom of the stairs, and he reached out without thinking and took the top 3 pieces off her stack before she could refuse, and his fingers touched her wrist for 1/2 second through the wool of her sleeve. He froze. He stepped back. He said, "I should have asked," she said. "Mr. Ashcroft, it is wood." He said, "It is your wood, miss, and it is your wrist." He set the 3 pieces of kindling on the bottom step and went out the front door and did not come back inside for 40 minutes. She stood in the parlor with the rest of the kindling in her arms and felt something inside her break that had needed to break for 12 years. She did not cry, but she set the wood down on the hearth, and she leaned her forehead against the cold stone of the chimney. And she stayed there until her breathing came back. The investigation moved in pieces. Eamon went down the mountain at first light every 3rd day. He came back at last light. He did not tell her where he had been. He told Beckett. Beckett sometimes told her, sometimes did not. In the 2nd week he told her this much. He told her Mrs. Ada Whitfield had finally agreed to come up the mountain. She would arrive the following Tuesday if the road held. She would bring with her a ledger book she had kept in the bottom of her midwife bag for 20 years. A ledger. Of what? Beckett did not say. He said, "Miss, I do not want you to hear it twice. Once will be enough. Once from her. Wait for her." She waited. She did not sleep well. She did not eat well. She started reading her father's tin box of papers at the kitchen table after supper. Deeds, receipts, letters from a man in Boston named Mr. Harlan Wexler, who had been her father's lawyer until her father died. She had not understood any of it when she was 14. She did not understand most of it now. She found the eagle once, a small wax seal on the back of a folded document, a bird with spread wings, identical to the one carved into the handle of her mother's comb. She did not know what it meant. She set the document aside. She would learn what it meant in 7 more days. But not yet. Not yet. In the 3rd week, the bad expectation rhythm began. She did not have a name for it then. She only knew that every morning she woke up bracing for something. And every morning something kind happened instead. And the kind thing was almost worse than the cruel thing would have been, because the kind thing did not match the inside of her head. Rhett brought her a small stack of books from a trunk in the attic. He set them on the kitchen table. He said, "These were Mara's. She would have wanted them read. Take any you like." She had expected some kind of price. There was no price. Eamon noticed she favored her left side at the wash basin. He shortened the legs of the kitchen stool by 2 inches the next morning so she could sit while she peeled potatoes. He did not mention it. He did not look at her when she sat down on it the first time. She had expected some kind of attention drawn to her weakness. There was no attention. Beckett came in from the barn one evening with a small piece of carved wood in his hand. A bird, a meadowlark, hardly larger than his thumb. He set it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink without explanation and went out again. She had expected some kind of declaration. There was no declaration. The meadowlark was simply on the windowsill the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. She did not move it. She did not mention it. She did not ask who carved it. She knew. She watched it some afternoons while she kneaded bread. She watched it. She watched her own hands. She watched her own hands not shake for the first time in 3 years. Tuesday morning, Mrs. Ada Whitfield came up the mountain on a mule. She was 67 years old. She wore a man's wool coat. She carried a leather midwife bag that had been her mother's. She climbed down off the mule without help, and she walked into the kitchen of Larkspur Ridge, and she set the bag on the table and she said, "Sit down, child. This is going to take an hour, and you are going to want to be sitting." Tabitha sat. Mrs. Whitfield opened the bag. She drew out a black ledger book, bound in waxed canvas. She opened it to the first page. She said, "I have been the midwife in Silver Creek since 1844. I have brought 411 children into this valley. I have laid out 163 of the dead. I knew Roy Pickett's father before Roy Pickett was born. I knew Roy Pickett's first wife. Her name was Mary Catherine Brennan. She was 18 years old. He married her in the spring of 1872. She was dead by Christmas." Tabitha did not breathe. Mrs. Whitfield turned the page. "His second wife came in 74, from Pennsylvania, Cordelia Vane. I delivered her of a stillborn son in the autumn of 75. Her husband told the town she had run off with a drummer the following spring. I sat with that girl for 3 days before she vanished. She did not run. She was 21 years old. She was carrying a second child. She was hiding bruises the size of a man's fist on her ribs, and she had told me, the day before she disappeared, that she had found a small leather pouch in her husband's desk with another woman's wedding ring in it." Tabitha's hand went to her mouth. Mrs. Whitfield did not slow. "Then your sister Mara, 1876. She was 20. She lasted 2 months. She came to me one afternoon. She told me she had found false land deeds in her husband's barn. She told me her husband was claiming title to mountain parcels that were not his. She told me she was going to write home to her brothers. I told her to write the letter from my kitchen, and not from her own. She did. The letter never reached Larkspur Ridge. Roy Pickett intercepted it at the post office. He was friendly with the postmaster. Mara was dead within 9 days. He burned her letters the same night. He told the town she had run off with a Crow trader. The sheriff agreed. The sheriff has agreed to many things over many years." Beckett at the doorway closed his eyes. Mrs. Whitfield kept reading. "Susanna, 1879. A young widow from St. Paul. She lasted 4 months. He told the town her tuberculosis had come back. There was no tuberculosis. I had examined her 3 weeks before she vanished. Her lungs were as clear as a bell. Pearl, 1881, from Chicago, 3 months. He told the town she had drowned in the river. There was no body. Lottie, 1883, from Ohio, 6 weeks. He told the town she had returned home to her sister. I wrote the sister myself. There was no sister. Lottie had no living family. That is why she answered the advertisement." Mrs. Whitfield closed the ledger. She looked at Tabitha. She said, "And then you, child, you, Tabitha Halloran, 6th in 12 years. 3 weeks alive on the picket place, the longest of any of them except Mara. Tabitha said, "Why?" The word came out hollow. She said, "Why so many? Why us?" Mrs. Whitfield reached across the table. She did not touch her. She put her old hand on the table near Tabitha's hand, where Tabitha could see it. She said, "Because there is something each of you brought to that man that he wanted more than he wanted you alive. With Mary Catherine, it was a small inheritance in Ohio. With Cordelia, it was a quarter section south of town her father had homesteaded. With Mara." Mrs. Whitfield looked at Beckett. "With Mara it was nothing. He picked her because she was beautiful and because she was alone. And she was the one who found him out. So he killed her faster than he killed the others." Beckett's hand on the doorframe went white. Mrs. Whitfield went on. "With Susanna, it was a house in St. Paul her late husband had left her. With Pearl, it was a railroad pension. With Lottie, it was 80 acres of farmland in Ohio. With you, Tabitha." She paused. She looked at Tabitha's father's tin box on the corner of the table. "With you, he advertised for a Boston woman. He paid extra for a Boston woman. He has never advertised for a Boston woman before. So whatever it is in that box." Tabitha looked at the box. She had been looking at the box for 2 weeks. She had not understood it. She said, I do not know what is in there." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Then we will look together, child, tonight." She closed the ledger. She slid it across the table. She said, "And there is one thing more." Tabitha said, "What?" Mrs. Whitfield said, "Agnes Crowley." Beckett at the door took one step into the room. Mrs. Whitfield said, "Agnes Crowley is not what this town pretends she is. She is not Roy Pickett's cousin. She is not a respectable widow. She is his partner. She has been his partner for 12 years. She doesn't love him. She does not even like him. But she has taken 12% of every parcel of land he has stolen from a dead woman, and she has hidden it in her own deed book at the mercantile. And she is the one who feeds the sheriff, not Roy, Agnes." Tabitha closed her eyes. She said, "Then the law." Mrs. Whitfield said, "The law in Silver Creek is bought, child. The law in Silver Creek has been bought since I was your age. But the law in Helena, the territorial judge, Thomas Calder, he is not bought. He cannot be bought. He rides his circuit through here every fall. He will be in Helena until the 3rd Tuesday of November. After that, the snow takes the pass," Eamon said from the corner of the kitchen. He had not spoken in 2 hours. He said, "I will leave at first light." Beckett said, "You will not go alone." Eamon said, "I will go alone. You will stay here. You will stay with her. The 3rd week is when he comes for them. We are in the 3rd week, brother." The kitchen went very quiet. Tabitha looked at Mrs. Whitfield's old veined hand on the table near hers. She said, "He will come." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Yes, child." Tabitha said, "Soon." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Within days." Tabitha said, "Alone." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Not the first time. He will send a man up the road first to test the ground. A boy, maybe, with a message. The message will be a lie. He will say he is sorry. He will say he wants you home. He will say he will not be angry. That is the first knock. If you answer, he comes himself the night after. If you do not answer, he comes anyway. But with a posse, and with the sheriff, and with a paper." Tabitha said. "What paper?" Mrs. Whitfield said. "A paper signed by a justice of the peace who eats at his table. A paper that says you are a runaway wife and he has the right to bring you home," Beckett said quietly, "and once you are back on his land." He did not finish. He did not need to. Tabitha sat in the kitchen of Larkspur Ridge with the ledger in front of her and her father's tin box at her elbow, and 3 Ashcroft brothers around her, and 1 old midwife across from her, and the wind moving in the lodgepole pines outside the window. And she said the first true thing she had said in 12 years. She said, "I will not go back." Mrs. Whitfield's eyes filled. The old woman did not cry. She had not cried in 40 years, but her eyes filled. She said, "Child, that is the sentence none of the others ever got to say." That night Tabitha did not lock her bedroom door from the inside. She did not unlock it as a statement. She unlocked it because she had forgotten. She had forgotten to be afraid of the wrong man. She had remembered to be afraid of the right one. It was not the same fear. The right fear had a shape. The right fear could be planned for. The right fear could be answered. She lay in the bed with the lavender quilt pulled to her chin, and she listened to the now familiar footstep crossing the kitchen below at 30-minute intervals. She knew the footstep tonight. It was Beckett's. He had taken the watch himself. He would do that every night from this night to the end. She did not know that yet, but she suspected it. Because the footstep paused once, just once, at the foot of the staircase, as if a man had thought about climbing it, and had decided against, and had instead set one large, warm hand on the banister for a half-second, and then turned around and walked back to the table. She heard the chair scrape gently as he sat down. She heard the kettle move on the stove. She heard him exhale. A long, slow breath, the breath of a man who had not exhaled in 8 years. She turned her face into the pillow. She held the comb against her chest, and for the first time since her mother had died, she said a thing into the dark that was not a prayer and was not an apology. She said, "Thank you." She did not say who she said it to. She did not need to. Wednesday morning. Amon Ashcroft rode out of Larkspur Ridge before sunrise. He carried 2 pistols, a Winchester rifle, 3 days of jerked venison, a sealed letter from his brother addressed to Judge Thomas Calder of the Montana Territorial Bench, and a small folded square of waxed canvas containing 1 page torn out of Mrs. Ada Whitfield's ledger. The page named Mary Catherine Brennan, 1872, cause of death, suspected poisoning, witness, A. Whitfield, body interred, picket land, north fence, under the cottonwood. Amon did not look back as he rode. He had said his goodbyes silently the night before. He had laid 1 hand on the post of his sister Mara's bed where the hair ribbon still hung. He had whispered 4 words to that ribbon. He had said, "We see you now." He had ridden out at 4 in the morning into a thin, gray mountain dawn. The snow had not come yet, but the pass would close inside a week. He had 6 days, maybe 7. He had to ride 240 miles to Helena and back through territory that would try to kill him with weather alone. And he had to do it without being followed, because somewhere down the mountain, down in Silver Creek, Roy Pickett had come home from the boarding house the morning after his bride had vanished off his porch, and Roy Pickett had stood in his cold kitchen looking at a gray wool dress folded on a bed. And Roy Pickett had said to no one at all, "Ashcroft." He had said it once. Then he had said it again. Then he had walked the 4 miles into Silver Creek through the wind without his hat, and he had banged on the front door of the Mercantile at 7 in the morning, and he had said to Agnes Crowley, "They have her. Get the sheriff. We ride at first light tomorrow." Agnes Crowley had set down her teacup. She had said, "And the paper." Roy had said, "I will have a paper by tonight." She had said, "And if the paper does not hold," he had said, "then I burn that mountain to the dirt, Agnes. I burn it to the dirt." Mrs. Crowley had looked at him for a long moment over the rim of her cup. She had not been frightened of Roy Pickett in 12 years, but she had felt something cold move in the room, because Roy Pickett had said the words, "I burn it to the dirt," with no expression on his face. And she remembered. Suddenly, with a clarity she did not enjoy, that she was the only other person alive who could put him on a gallows. She set her cup down. She said, "I will have your paper by sundown, Roy." He left. She locked the front door of the Mercantile behind him. She walked to her private office at the back. She opened the lowest drawer of her own desk. She took out a small revolver she had not loaded in 9 years. She loaded it. She set it inside her sleeve. Because Mrs. Agnes Crowley had decided, in that one cold moment over a teacup, that if it came to it, if the mountain held, if the paper failed, if the snow trapped them all in the valley together, she would shoot Roy Pickett herself before she let him take her down with him. She did not know yet that her decision would matter. She did not know yet that an old midwife had already torn a page out of a black ledger and given it to a man riding south through a thin gray dawn. She did not know yet that on a porch 11 miles up a mountain, a young woman from Boston had said the words, "I will not go back," and had meant them, and had unlocked her bedroom door for the first time in 21 days, and had said thank you to the dark. She did not know, but she would, because 3 days later, the first man Roy sent up the mountain road would be a frightened 16-year-old boy from the livery stable, with a folded note, and a lie about a sick horse, and a hidden second message tucked inside his boot for any Ashcroft who would take it. The boy would arrive at the gate of Larkspur Ridge at 4 in the afternoon on a gray Saturday. He would be soaking wet. He would be terrified. He would not be the storm. He would be the rumor of the storm. And Tabitha Halloran, standing on the porch of a house that was not yet hers, with her mother's comb in her apron pocket, and her father's tin box still unopened on the kitchen table, and a small carved meadowlark on the kitchen windowsill behind her. She would see the boy ride into the yard, and she would not run inside. She would walk down the steps, slowly because of her knee, but also because she had decided she would meet him in the middle of the yard. She would say, without looking at Beckett behind her on the porch, she would say to that frightened boy in the wet wool coat, "Tell Roy Pickett that the 6th one is not coming home." And in saying it, she would not yet know that the eagle on her mother's comb was about to begin telling its own story. The boy was 16. He sat on a borrowed bay mare that was too tall for him, and he held the reins in 2 fists like a child holds the rim of a tin cup. His hat was gone. His hair was flattened to his forehead by sleet. His lips were the color of skim milk. Tabitha walked down the porch steps slowly, because of her knee, because the air had teeth, because she had decided 3 nights ago that she would never again move fast for a man she did not choose. She crossed the yard. She stopped 6 feet from the mare. She said, "Boy, get down." He blinked at her. He said, "Ma'am, I have a message from." She said, "I know who you have a message from. Get down. You are blue." He got down. His knees buckled when his boots touched the ground. Rhett was already coming out of the barn with a wool blanket and a tin cup of hot coffee. He wrapped the blanket around the boy without speaking. He pressed the cup into the boy's hands. The boy did not drink. He was shaking too hard to find his mouth with it. Beckett came down off the porch. He did not draw the pistol on his belt. He did not raise his voice. He stopped beside Tabitha, and he said to the boy, "Son, what did he tell you to say?" The boy looked at Beckett. The boy looked at Tabitha. The boy looked at the bomb in his hands. The boy said, "He told me to say, Mr. Pickett needs his wife home. There is a sick mare in the barn that only she knows how to settle." He said, "Tell her he is sorry," he said. "Tell her she can come back safe." Beckett said nothing. Tabitha said, "And the second message." The boy went very still. She said, "The one in your boot, the one Mrs. Whitfield told you to bring." His mouth came open. She said gently, "Boy, you are not in trouble, but take it out. Slow." He bent. He pulled off the left boot. He tipped it. A folded square of waxed paper fell into the mud. Beckett picked it up. He read it once. His jaw did the thing it did when he was not going to speak. He handed it to Tabitha. The handwriting was old, slanting, careful, 3 lines. "He has the paper. The sheriff signed it. He rides Sunday at first light with 7 men. Ada Whitfield." Tabitha folded the paper. She put it in her apron pocket. She said to the boy, "What is your name?" He said, "Henry Bell, ma'am." She said, "Henry, did Mr. Pickett pay you to come up here?" He shook his head. He said he would pay me when I came back with you. He said he would pay me $5. I have never had $5, ma'am." She nodded. She said, "Henry, go inside, sit by the fire. Rhett will give you bread and stew. You will not ride back tonight. You will ride back tomorrow, at first light." The boy said, "He will be angry." She said, "He will be angry whether you ride tonight or not, so you might as well be warm." The boy almost smiled. He did not have the strength to do it all the way. Rhett walked him to the porch. Beckett did not move. He stood beside Tabitha in the yard with the sleet ticking against the brim of his hat. He did not look at her. He said, "Sunday." She said, "Sunday." He said, "3 days." She said, "Yes." He said, "Eamon is not back." She said, "I know." He said, "We do not know if the judge is coming." She said, "I know that too." He said, "Miss." She said, "Beckett." He looked at her. "Just 1 second." Then back at the road. He said, "Whatever is in that box on the kitchen table, tonight is the night we open it." She said, "Yes." She walked back to the house. She did not limp. She had not noticed she had stopped limping. She would not notice for another 2 days. They opened the box at the kitchen table after supper. Mrs. Ada Whitfield had stayed. She had refused to ride back down to Silver Creek. She had said, "I am 67 years old, and I am tired of pretending I do not know things." She had taken the small back bedroom off the kitchen, and she had unpacked her midwife bag onto the dresser, like a woman moving in. Rhett built up the fire. Beckett lit the second lamp. Tabitha set her father's tin box in the center of the table. Henry, the stable boy, had been put to bed in the loft of the barn, with 2 wool blankets and an old hound for warmth. The boy had asked for the hound himself. He had said he had never slept with a dog. Rhett had said this is the night for it, son. The hound was named Patience. Tabitha lifted the lid of the box. She had looked inside the box every day for 2 weeks and had understood none of it. Tonight she did not need to understand it alone. She set the papers on the table one by one. A deed to a house in Boston that her father had sold the year before he died. A receipt for a funeral wreath. Hers. Her mother's. A small bundle of letters tied in blue thread. Her father's letters home from the war. She had read them as a girl. She set them aside without opening them. Then, at the bottom of the box, a larger folded document, heavy paper, sealed with a small red wax disc pressed with the spread wings of an eagle, identical to the carving on her mother's comb. Beckett leaned forward. Mrs. Whitfield set her old reading glasses on her nose. Rhett did not breathe. Tabitha broke the seal. She unfolded the document. She read it once. She read it again. She lifted her eyes. She said, "I do not." She said, "I do not understand." She passed it to Beckett. He read it. He read it twice. He read it a third time. He said one word. He said, "Land." He set it down. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his hand on the casing, and he did not speak for a full minute. Mrs. Whitfield picked up the document. She read it slowly through her glasses. She set it down. She looked at Tabitha. She said, "Child, your father, what did he do for a living?" Tabitha said, "He was a tailor in Boston." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Your father was a tailor in Boston." "Yes. He was also a member of an investment association called the Atlantic Eagle Land Trust. It was a Boston club. Wealthy Boston men. They bought up acreage all over the Western Territories in the 1860s as speculation to pass to their children." Tabitha said, "My father was not wealthy." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Your father bought one share, child. With every spare dollar he had for 7 years. He bought one share, and the share entitled him to one parcel, 320 acres. The trust drew lots in 1864 to assign the parcels." Tabitha said, "Where?" Mrs. Whitfield set her finger on the document. She read the location aloud. Township 9 North, Range 8 East. The northwest quarter of Section 22 of the Montana Principal Meridian. Beckett at the window said softly, 320 acres of bottomland on the Silver Creek drainage, south face of the ridge, spring-fed, best grass in the county. Mrs. Whitfield said, "Roy Pickett has been running his cattle on it for 12 years, child, without legal title, because the title is yours. It has been yours since the day your father died, and your father told no one because he was carrying it in your mother's comb to pass to you in case anything happened to him before you came of age." Tabitha said, "He never told me." Mrs. Whitfield said, "He died too soon, child. He died too soon." Tabitha sat in the yellow lamplight with her hand pressed over her mouth. She said into her hand, "Then Roy," she said, "then Roy advertised for me." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Roy advertised for a Boston woman with brown hair and blue eyes whose father had been in a Boston gentleman's club. Roy had been waiting 12 years for a Halloran daughter to surface in the marriage advertisements. He had a friend in Boston watching the registries. The day your name appeared, Roy paid $60 for you. And he paid $300 more to a Boston lawyer named Harlan Wexler to forge the transfer paper that would have moved your land into his name on your wedding day." The kitchen went still. Even the fire seemed to go still. Tabitha said, "He was going to marry me Sunday." Mrs. Whitfield said, He was going to marry you Sunday, and he was going to forge your signature on a deed transfer Monday morning, and you were going to be dead Tuesday. Rhett at the end of the table covered his face with both hands. Beckett at the window didn't turn. His shoulders moved once, just once. Tabitha said, "And the others?" Mrs. Whitfield said, "The others had smaller things, smaller parcels, smaller inheritances, smaller pieces of his appetite. You child are the largest piece, 320 acres of spring-fed bottom land, the best in the county. He has been waiting for you longer than he waited for any of them." Tabitha said, "Then this is why." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Yes, child, this is why." Tabitha did not weep. She did not. She set the document flat on the table. She smoothed it with both hands. She traced the edge of the red wax eagle with her thumb. She said, "I am the deed." Mrs. Whitfield said, "You are the deed, child," she said, "and on Sunday he is coming for the deed." Mrs. Whitfield said, "Yes," she said, "not for me." Mrs. Whitfield said, "He was never coming for you, child." She lifted her face. She looked at Beckett at the window. She said, "Beckett." He turned. She said, "Take the deed. Hide it. Tonight. Somewhere. I cannot find it. Somewhere even I cannot give up if he asks." Beckett did not move. He said, "Miss, that deed is yours." She said, "I know it is mine. That is why I am asking you to keep it." He did not move. She said, "Please." He came across the kitchen. He took the deed in both hands. He folded it once. He slid it inside the breast pocket of his coat, over his heart. He said, "Until you ask for it back." She said, "Until I ask for it back." He said, "Yes, miss." She said, "Tabitha." He stopped. He said, "Tabitha." It was the first time he had said her given name. He said it the way a man crosses himself. That night they did not sleep. Mrs. Whitfield slept. The old woman could sleep through anything. She had buried too many people not to know that sleep was a kind of honoring of the day's work. Henry, the stable boy, slept in the barn with Patience the hound across his feet. Rhett slept in 2-hour stretches with his rifle across his knees by the kitchen door. Beckett did not sleep at all. He sat at the kitchen table with a tin cup of coffee gone cold in his hand and the deed against his heart, and he watched the road through the small window above the sink. He did not look at the stairs. He did not look at the door of Tabitha's room at the top of them. He listened. She did not come down. She stood at her bedroom window for 2 hours in her plain white nightdress with her mother's comb in her hand, and she watched the moon come up over Larkspur Ridge. She thought about Roy Pickett's hand on the small of her back the night her knee struck the porch step. She thought about her mother braiding her hair when she was 6 years old. She thought about her father at the kitchen table in Boston, pressing a small wax eagle into a folded paper with a brass seal. She thought. She had been carrying it her whole life. She had not known. She thought. She had been a deed. A signature in a body. A piece of paper that breathed. And she thought, no, she was not a deed. She had not been a deed when she was 6, and her mother had braided her hair. She had not been a deed when she was 14, and her father had died, and she had held his hand at the end. She had not been a deed when she was 24, and she had taken in mending for 2 years to pay off the funeral. She had not been a deed in any of the days she had survived in 26 years. She had been a person. The deed had only been the thing the men who wanted to use her had agreed she was. She turned away from the window. She put the comb in the pocket of her nightdress. She walked down the stairs. She did not creep. She walked. Beckett heard her on the third step. He did not turn his head. He set the tin cup down. She came into the kitchen. She did not stand near him. She stood across the table from him, with the table between them, as a woman of her time and her training would. She said, "Beckett," he said. "Yes, Tabitha," she said. "I want to learn to shoot the long rifle, tomorrow." He looked up. He said, "I had been planning on offering." She said, "I know you had." He said, "It is a heavy gun for a small woman." She said, "I will manage." He said, "Yes, you will." She said, "I am not going to shoot to kill him." He said, "All right." She said, "I am going to shoot him in the hand." His mouth moved, not a smile, something older than a smile. He said, "Why the hand?" She said, "Because he used it on 6 women. Because he used it on me. Because I would like him to never close his fingers on a glass again without remembering." Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I will teach you to hit a tin can at 30 yards by Saturday." She said, "Thank you." She turned to leave. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. She did not look back. She said into the dark stairwell. "Beckett," he said. "Yes," she said. "When this is done, if we are both still here, I would like you to ask me something." He said, "What would you like me to ask you?" She said, "I would like you to ask me if you can court me. In the proper way, like a man who has decided, and not like a man who is afraid I will break." A long silence. Then his voice, low, steady. "Tabitha." "I will ask." She climbed the stairs. She slept. She slept for the first time in 8 days. Saturday morning, Tabitha Halloran hit a tin can at 30 yards on the 3rd try. She hit it again on the 4th try. She hit it 11 times out of 15. Beckett did not praise her. He nodded once. He said, "You will do." Eamon Ashcroft did not come back Saturday. The pass had closed Friday night. A foot of snow on the high road. Drifts taller than a man's shoulder in the cuts. No rider was getting across that country in either direction until the wind shifted. Beckett did not say what he was thinking. Tabitha did not ask. But they both knew whatever happened Sunday at first light. It happened without Judge Thomas Calder. It happened with 11 souls on a mountain. 3 Ashcroft brothers. 1 was missing. 2 were here. 1 Boston bride who had learned to shoot a rifle in 5 days. 1 67-year-old midwife with a Bible and a Derringer pistol in her apron pocket. 1 frightened stable boy and an old hound named Patience. Against 7 men with a paper and a sheriff and Roy Pickett at the front of them on a black horse. Saturday night, Tabitha braided her hair the way her mother had taught her when she was 6. She braided it tight. She pinned it close to her skull. She did not put on her gray wool dress. She put on a pair of canvas trousers Rhett had cut down for her from his own. She put on one of Eamon's old wool shirts. She put on a coat that had belonged to Mara Ashcroft. She had asked Beckett. He had nodded and gone into the trunk in the attic and brought it down without speaking. It fit. Of course it fit. It had been waiting. She came down the stairs at 3 in the morning. Beckett was at the kitchen table. He looked up. He looked at her in his brother's shirt and his sister's coat and his brother's old trousers and her mother's comb in her braid, like a single small ornament. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Tabitha," she said. "Beckett," he said. "If today goes wrong," she said. "It will not go wrong," he said. "If today goes wrong, I want you to know," she said. "Beckett," he said. "Let me say it," she said. "All right," he said. "I have been alone on this mountain for 8 years. I have been looking for my sister for 8 years. I have been preparing for a fight with that man for 8 years. I have not let a woman into this house for 8 years. And then, on a Monday in October, you walked into a mercantile in Silver Creek, and you apologized for being late, and I—" He stopped. He said, "And I knew," she said. "What did you know?" He said, "I knew that I had been waiting for you, and I had not known I had been waiting, which is a thing a man does not get to say out loud often in this life, Tabitha. So I am saying it now, in case I do not get to say it later." Tabitha did not move. She did not move for a long time. Then she crossed the kitchen. She did not touch him. She stood beside his chair. She put her hand on the table near his hand. Where he could see it. The way Mrs. Whitfield had taught her without teaching her. He did not reach for her hand. He looked at it. He looked at it the way a starved man looks at bread. He said, "May I?" She said, "Yes." He put his hand over hers, the whole hand. His was so much larger that hers disappeared inside it. She did not pull back. He did not press. They sat like that for 1 minute, then 2, then his thumb moved. Once, across her knuckles. She closed her eyes. She said, "Beckett." He said, "Yes," she said. "When this is over," he said. "Yes," she said. "Ask me," he said. "I will." She took her hand back, gently because she had to. Because in 3 hours she had to shoot a rifle. Because her hands needed to be still. He let her. He understood. She climbed the stairs again. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands on her knees, and she waited for the first gray of the sky. At first light she came back down. Mrs. Whitfield was at the stove making coffee strong enough to strip varnish off a chair. Rhett was at the front window with his rifle laid across his forearm. Beckett was on the porch. The yard was white. 6 inches of new snow, still falling. A thin sky the color of skim milk. Henry, the stable boy, was at the kitchen table, with Patience the hound at his feet. The boy was wearing one of Rhett's old shirts and one of Mara's wool scarves. He looked smaller than he had 2 days ago. He also looked somehow exactly the right size, as if the house had decided where to put him, and he had decided to stay put. He said to Tabitha, "Ma'am," she said. "Henry," he said, "I would like to stay." She said, "Until when?" He said, "Until." He did not have an end to the sentence. She said, "All right, Henry, until." Patience the hound thumped her tail once on the floorboards. 8 horses came up the road at 7:20. Rhett saw them first. He said, "Brother." Beckett came in off the porch. He shouldered the rifle. He looked at Tabitha. He looked at Mrs. Whitfield. He looked at the boy and the hound. He said, "Inside, all of you. The boy and the dog in the cellar. Mrs. Whitfield in the back bedroom with the door bolted. Tabitha at the side window with the long rifle. I take the porch. Rhett the loft. We do not fire first. We do not fire until we have to. If they have a paper, we read it. If they try to cross the porch, we end it." Mrs. Whitfield said. "I will be in the back bedroom with my derringer. If a man comes through that window over the bed, he will not come back out." Beckett did not smile. He almost did. He said, "Yes, ma'am." Rhett went up the ladder to the loft. Henry took Patience by the collar and went to the cellar. Mrs. Whitfield went to the back bedroom and slid the bolt. Tabitha went to the side window. She set the rifle on the sill. She put her cheek against the cold wood of the stock. She remembered everything Beckett had taught her in 5 days. She remembered the comb in her braid. She remembered her mother. She remembered her father pressing a wax eagle into a folded paper. She remembered Roy Pickett's hand on the small of her back. She did not remember being afraid. That was the strange part. She did not remember being afraid at all. The 8 horses stopped at the edge of the yard. Roy Pickett was at the front on a tall black horse. He was not wearing a coat that fit him. He was wearing a coat that had been his father's, too short in the sleeves. As if he had grabbed it in a hurry, as if the rage had stripped him of vanity. The sheriff was on his right. A man named Briggs. A small man with a gray mustache and a tin star and the slumped shoulders of a man who had said yes too many times for too little money. 5 other men behind them. 2 she did not know. 1 she recognized from the saloon in town. 1 the postmaster who had intercepted Mara's letter. 1 a tall stranger with a rifle across his saddlebow and eyes that did not like the weather. Roy Pickett raised his voice. He said, "Ashcroft." Beckett on the porch did not raise his. He said, "Pickett," Roy said, "I have come for my wife." Beckett said, "You have come for a deed." Silence in the yard. The snow ticked on the brim of Roy's hat. He said, "You are mistaken," Beckett said. "I am not," Roy said. "Sheriff, read the paper." The sheriff fumbled. He produced a folded document. He unfolded it. He read in a voice that was too quiet for the yard. "By the authority of the township of Silver Creek, be it known that the wife of one Roy J. Pickett, Mrs. Tabitha Pickett, formerly Halloran, having abandoned the marital home, is hereby ordered returned to her lawful husband, signed this 20th day of October, 1884. Justice Wendell Briggs." Beckett said, "Justice Wendell Briggs is your cousin, Sheriff." The sheriff said nothing. Beckett said, "And that paper would not be honored by any judge sitting in Helena." Roy said, "It does not need to be honored by a judge in Helena. It needs to be honored on this porch." Beckett said, "It will not be." Roy said, "Then I take her." Beckett said, "Then you do not leave this yard." Inside the kitchen, Tabitha lifted the rifle off the sill. She set the stock against her shoulder. She found Roy Pickett's right hand through the iron sight, the hand resting on the pommel of his saddle, the hand he had used. She breathed out. Her finger settled on the trigger, but she did not fire. Not yet, because Beckett had said. "We do not fire first," because she had decided. "I do not fire until he reaches." Roy Pickett reached. He drew the pistol from his hip. He raised it. He pointed it at Beckett Ashcroft on the porch. He said, "Last chance Hollister." He said the wrong name, the wrong family, the wrong mountain. The rage had stripped him of even his memory of who he was fighting. Tabitha Halloran fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The shot rang off the rim of the mountain and came back twice. Roy Pickett's pistol went one way, and a fine red spray went the other, and a sound came out of him that did not have any words in it. His horse reared. He came off the saddle backward. He hit the snow. The sheriff's mouth opened. He did not draw his weapon. He sat very still on his horse with both hands visible. Beckett said from the porch without raising his voice. He said, "Boys, set them down, or get off your animals. Either is fine with me." The 5 riders behind Roy Pickett looked at each other. Then they looked at the snow. Then they looked at the loft window, where the barrel of Rhett's rifle had been resting on the sill. The whole time, they had not seen it. They saw it now. They set their weapons down in the snow one by one. The sheriff said, "Mr. Ashcroft," Beckett said. "Sheriff." The sheriff said, "I would like to make a statement to a circuit judge whenever he should arrive." Beckett said, "Should I assume that statement involves Mrs. Crowley's account book?" The sheriff said, "It would. Yes, in some detail." Beckett said, "Then come down off that horse, Sheriff, slowly, and come up on this porch and sit on this step, and we will wait together for a judge." The sheriff dismounted. He came up the steps. He sat on the bottom one. He took off his hat. He held it in his hands. He looked older than he had 10 minutes before. In the snow, Roy Pickett was making sounds that were not words. He was holding his right hand in his left. The hand he had used was no longer a hand he could use. Tabitha set the rifle down on the kitchen table. She walked to the front door. She walked out onto the porch. She did not look at Beckett. She walked down the steps. She crossed the yard. She stopped 6 feet from Roy Pickett, where he lay in the snow. She did not need the rifle in her hands anymore. She said, "Roy." He looked up at her. His eyes were not the eyes of the man who had brought her home in a wagon 4 weeks ago. They were the eyes of an animal in a trap. She said, "Roy, I am the deed." He did not answer. She said, "I was always the deed. You knew that. I did not. I do now." He did not answer. She said, "I am not yours." He did not answer. She said, "I was never yours." She turned. She walked back to the porch. She climbed the steps. She passed Beckett at the door, without looking at him. She went to the kitchen. She sat down at the table. She put her hands flat on the wood. She watched them. They did not shake. They did not shake at all. The snow kept falling. Judge Thomas Calder rode into the yard of Larkspur Ridge at 2 o'clock that afternoon with Eamon Ashcroft on a borrowed horse beside him, and 4 U.S. deputy marshals behind him with their badges visible on their coats. The judge was a small man. He had a face like a winter apple. He climbed off his horse. He looked at Roy Pickett in the snow, with a tied-off hand. He looked at the 7 other men in a row on the ground. He looked at Sheriff Briggs on the porch step. He looked at Beckett Ashcroft in the doorway. He looked at the Boston woman at the kitchen table through the front window. He said, "Mr. Ashcroft," Beckett said. "Your Honor," the judge said. "Your brother rode through a closed pass to find me." Beckett said, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge said, "He nearly killed his horse." Beckett said, "He would have killed 2 horses, Your Honor." The judge said, "He told me the story on the ride, the whole of it. The midwife, the ledger, the deed, the 6 women, the land trust, the Boston lawyer. I have been waiting 12 years for an Ashcroft to give me a reason to ride into Silver Creek with deputies. He gave me one." Beckett said nothing. The judge said, "You wore a badge for me once, Beckett. You turned it in the morning your sister disappeared. I have kept it in my desk drawer for 8 years, waiting for the day you came down off that mountain to ask for it back. Beckett said, "I am not asking for it back today, Your Honor." The judge said, "I know that. You found something better up there." He nodded toward the kitchen window. Beckett did not turn his head. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, I did." The judge said, "Where is the bride?" Beckett said, "In the kitchen, Your Honor." The judge said, "May I?" Beckett said, "She is the one to ask." Judge Calder climbed the porch steps. He took off his hat. He stood in the open doorway. He did not cross the threshold. He said, "Mrs. Halloran, I am Thomas Calder. I am a circuit judge. I am here at the request of Mr. Amon Ashcroft. I would like to ask you some questions when you are ready. I will sit on the porch until you are." Tabitha looked up from the table. She looked at the small man with the winter apple face. She said, "Your Honor." He said, "Yes, Mrs. Halloran." She said, "I am ready now." He came in. He sat at the table. She told him everything in 1 hour and 17 minutes. Mrs. Whitfield brought the ledger. Beckett brought the deed. Amon brought the page torn from the ledger that named Mary Catherine Brennan. The boy, Henry, was brought up from the cellar, and the judge spoke to him gently for 10 minutes about what Roy Pickett had told him to say at the gate. Mrs. Crowley was arrested at her mercantile in town at 4 o'clock. She did not resist. She set her teacup down. She handed her own ledger book to the deputies herself. She said only one sentence to the senior marshal as they walked her to the wagon. She said, "Tell that Boston woman she is the first one of them I would not have bet against." The deputy did not write it down, but he told Tabitha later. She put her face in her hands for a long minute when she heard it. Then she lifted her face, and she let out one long, slow breath. The breath of a woman finishing a long road. Roy Pickett was carried to Helen in chains in a closed wagon. He stood trial in March. He hanged in April. Sheriff Briggs got 8 years for accessory and corruption. Mrs. Agnes Crowley got 15 for fraud and conspiracy to defraud, and what the judge called a sustained pattern of complicity in the death of women under the color of commerce. The bodies were found in May, 6 of them, buried at intervals along the north fence of the picket place. Beneath cottonwoods Roy had planted himself, as markers, the marshal said, of a man who liked to count his work. Mara Ashcroft was the 3rd in the row. The Ashcroft brothers buried her in June, on a south slope of Larkspur Ridge above the spring, where she had played as a girl, where the meadow larks nested in the long grass. Amon set a stone he carved himself. Rhett left her hair ribbon tied to the crosspiece. He had carried it for 8 years. He said he was tired of carrying it. Beckett did not speak at the burial. He stood at the foot of the grave, and he held Tabitha's hand the whole hour. She did not let go either, not once. In July of 1885, Beckett Ashcroft came down the porch steps of Larkspur Ridge on a hot afternoon with his hat in his hand and a small bunch of wild lupine in the other, and he found Tabitha at the spring filling a bucket. She straightened. He stopped 6 feet away. He said, "Tabitha," she said. "Beckett," he said. "May I ask?" she said. "Yes." He said, "May I court you? In the proper way, like a man who has decided, and not like a man who is afraid you will break." She said, "Yes, Beckett." He said, "I have nothing to offer you that you do not already own outright. 320 acres of bottomland. This house, the barn, the orchard, the spring." She said, "I know." He said, "I am offering only myself," she said. "I know that too," he said. "Yes or no, Tabitha?" She said, "Yes." He gave her the lupine. He did not touch her. He set his hat back on his head. He walked her up to the house with the bucket between them. They were married in September. Mrs. Ada Whitfield gave her away. The midwife stood in for the father Tabitha had lost 12 years before. She did so, without ceremony and without explanation. She said only, "I have been bringing children into this valley for 40 years. I have never given one of them away in marriage. I would like to do it once." Rhett sang at the wedding. He sang the old Scottish ballad he had been singing in the barn the afternoon Tabitha had stood on the path and listened. He sang all 5 verses. His voice did not break until the last one. Eamon read the vows. He was the steadiest of the 3. He did not cry. Henry, the stable boy, held the rings. He was 17 by then, and 3 inches taller, and he lived at Larkspur Ridge how as a son, and not as a boy. Patience, the hound, slept through the entire ceremony. The wedding night. The door closed gently. Outside, the first stars came up over the ridge. A meadowlark called once in the long grass. The wind moved in the lodgepole pines. Inside the house, a lamp went out, and in the morning, when the sun came over the ridge, the woman who had walked into a Montana mercantile in October of 1884 and apologized for being late did not need to apologize to anyone for anything ever again. She rebuilt the orchard. She fenced the bottom land. She ran 200 head of cattle on grass that had been stolen from her for 12 years before she ever set foot on it. She wrote letters to Boston, to matrimonial agencies, to the editors of the women's papers. She named names. She listed signs. She told women how to read an advertisement, how to ask the right questions, how to leave a husband who had stopped being a husband. She kept those letters going for 30 years. She started a small school for the children of the valley. She and Beckett had 2 of their own, a girl in 1887, a boy in 1890. She named the girl Mara, with Beckett's permission given quietly on a March evening with no other word spoken. She named the boy Henry. Mrs. Ada Whitfield lived to be 83. She delivered both of the Ashcroft children herself. She died in her own bed in her own house in Silver Creek, with Tabitha Halloran Ashcroft holding one of her hands and Rhett Ashcroft singing the old Scottish ballad on the other side of the bed. He sang all 5 verses again. He did not break this time. He had grown into the song. Years passed. Seasons passed. The mountain stayed. The spring kept running. The bottom land kept producing. A woman from Silver Creek wrote a long letter to a Boston newspaper in 1907 about a series of mail-order bride murders that had been stopped on the Montana frontier in 1884. The article ran in 1908. It named no names. It said only that the bride who had ended the killings had refused to be interviewed, that she lived still on her own land, that she was a mother, a wife, a school teacher, a correspondent, that she had once said to a young woman traveling west to be married. The exact words, "You do not have to apologize for the way you walk." And she had said it like a woman who had once apologized for too much, and had finally stopped. That was the last public mention of Tabitha Halloran Ashcroft for the rest of her life. She lived to be 79. She died on a soft spring morning in 1937, with her husband still alive beside her at 84. He had outlasted every doctor's prediction by 20 years. He had outlasted everyone but her. She was buried on the south slope of Larkspur Ridge, above the spring beside her sister-in-law, Mara. The headstone said only, Tabitha Halloran Ashcroft, 1858 to 1937. She came to the mountains late. She was not late at all.